Chapter 49. Bogomil or Belial? If God did not exist, it would be necessary for man to invent him. Voltaire. I was at the scanning place, ready to begin a new adventure, and Lialeb was with me. He was explaining things that would be helpful for me to understand before I started my journey back in time. My admiration for Lialeb continuously increased with each encounter, and I grew to respect his wealth of knowledge. No matter what I asked him, he always knew the answer. Lialeb, you explained to me that you were the soul who was in Manny's body during his reincarnation on Earth. Can you tell me any other of your significant reincarnations? All my reincarnations have been significant, as gods and angelic beings cannot waste cards. They must bring an advancement toward darkness or light. In the 10th century of our era, I was the soul of Teofilo Bogomil, Lialeb answered. Tell me more about Teofilo Bogomil, I requested. Teofilo Bogomil was considered by many to be the biggest heretic of the Christian world during that time. In the world of mortals, it's difficult to find much information about Teofilo Bogomil. But I tried to bring the light of the darkness to that period of darkness of the light, Lialeb answered. Please tell me about him. I was born on February 2nd, 927 of the Christian era. Let's add the numbers. 2 plus 2 plus 9 plus 2 plus 7 equals 22. To get the most of my incarnation, I wanted to make it a double 22, Lialeb said. I don't understand how February 2nd, 927 can be a double 22, I asked. The addition of all the numbers is 22, but if you take February alone, the number is 2. In addition to the second day, you can form a number 22. These are potent combinations of numbers we can use, Lialeb added. I could see with my very own eyes the birth of Teofilo, Lialeb continued. I loudly cried when I was born. I didn't know then that this cry represented the coming of many other future cries. I, Teofilo Bogomil, was born in Bulgaria, a recently Christianized country. I was ordered to become a priest exactly when I was 22 years old, and shortly after that I was ordained and confirmed in the official church, Lialeb said. Does the Bogomil name mean anything special? I asked. The word Bogomil means friend of God, or God's beloved one, and the meaning forms through the combination of two Slavic words. Bogo means God, and Milo means friend. It is very curious to discover that my first name, Teofilo, also means precisely the same, but it comes from a Greek meaning. Friend of God has a double meaning, which is to say, through my first name and last name, I was chosen by God, Lialeb answered. Could it be that through your name you were sending us a message, hinting at the duality of that same God? I asked. At the beginning of the 10th century, Bulgaria had just been Christianized, and the political and religious situation was very complex and complicated. The field workers suffered oppression caused by the feudal system. The church in those times was extremely corrupt and was within the same line of criteria imposed by power. It is here, at this point, and this moment in history, when I went on to confront the religious, political, and feudal hierarchy, Lialeb explained. But what exactly do the teachings of Bogomil consist of? I asked. God created the heavens and angels, but he also created Satan. Satan rebelled against God, but the angels who maintained their faith in God defeated him. As a result of this revolutionary act, Satan was expelled from the heavens, or from what I call the kingdom of the Spirit. Despite this, Satan was still capable of preserving the power of creating, and as a revenge for his defeat in the celestial world, He created the natural world in 7 days. At the same time, he created humanity to live in it. But the humans created by Satan lacked a soul. It was then that God decided to give a soul to each earthly body. That is how the idea that human beings are not holy began. Since Satan created these bodies, they could never be holy, Lileb explained. But this is not exactly true, I stated. You are right, Mara. But at this particular point in history, it was impossible for the people to understand the truth about the creation and to accept that the basis of their beliefs was not true. What else did you explain to them? As a result, all matter was derived from diabolic matter, which has been segregated from God, and subsequently is always in a permanent state of struggle with him. My disciples were scared because the rebellion against the Orthodox Church was a rebellion against the established order. It was not only a religious issue, but also a political one. We, the Bogomilians, were ascetic and Puritans. We disdained matter and all that which was material in nature, because according to my teachings, all that had a diabolical origin. By rejecting material things and by rejecting the pleasures of this world, we felt that we could get closer and closer to the spiritual world, Lileb explained. I'm puzzled, Lileb. Wasn't that precisely what the light was preaching through his churches and his messengers? Each time I find myself more and more confused trying to understand the real difference between the light and darkness, I told Lileb. You are aware that the light and the darkness are the same things. The only difference between us is the timing and interpretation of each one of their teachings, Lileb answered. What else? I asked. We rejected all Christian symbolism, such as the one used for the cross. We rejected the Trinity as the symbol for holiness, and we rejected the majority of the teachings within the Old Testament. Within the New Testament, I saved only those teachings of Christ which referred to the Spirit, Lileb explained. How did you resolve all these problems? I asked. I explained to my followers that God had sent an angel to earth, whom he converted into his Son, and who was none other than Jesus Christ, Lileb noted. I can see through your teachings of the darkness the nature of the angels, their union and composition, and how all these together formed the Creator. Everything is beginning to make more and more sense to me. I understand that during this period, to consider Christ as an angel and not like God himself could be considered heretic, which could lead you as the transmitter of this theory to dreadful consequences, I stated. Bogomil insisted that Christ apparently had been born from Maria, but in reality he had been sent by God to combat Satan, and not necessarily to redeem human beings who were unredeemable once Satan came into existence. Christ had suffered as a man, but as spirit he had been triumphant. He left his spiritual doctrine, and it became a legacy, Lileb explained. However, the struggle between evil, represented by Satan, and well represented by the spirit or the soul, will continue for eternity? I asked. When the final redemption occurs, it will be to liberate the soul, or the spiritual beginning of the body, which represents the beginning of the physical principle represented by that same body. However, isn't that what mortals, day by day, living on the natural world, look for? Lileb asked me. I think so, Lileb, I said. In the year 967 of our era, Teofilo Bogomil was already 40 years old. I knew that I did not have much more time left on earth, but I continued with my teachings. I stated that the human life of Christ was nothing more than appearances. Redemption is not important because Satan created man, not God. Therefore, the sacraments have no value, and those who consider it to be the doctrine of the Church are nothing more than pretenders who sell themselves to power, Lileb explained. Then the Bogomilian religious principles were no more than a strong movement for change and social vindication, I asked. The union of the church and the government, in all levels, would become my main enemies. I publicly asked for the rejection of the obligatory military recruitment and total rejection to the civil and military authorities. I wanted people to return to what I called the original sentiment, or the original roots of Christianity. Within our movement, men and women received the same treatment, and all of them had the same rights and obligations. Women had access to the same education that men had, and women could be ordered to become priests and leaders in their community, just like men, said Lileb. What was wrong with that? I asked. Bogomil's teachings were destroyed because it had turned into a religion for the poor and the field workers. The church and the oligarchy were only interested in his defeat, and they would finally end our movement by force. We used the privileges of the light to establish the power of our darkness. All these people who condemned me were our people, but playing roles for the light, Lileb explained. What happened next? I asked. I was tortured and physically destroyed, but even in my weakened condition I conserved all my strength. The message was already there, and it extended throughout all of Europe for the next 500 years, Lileb answered. And the end? I asked. One cold morning in February 969, I was burnt in a blaze like any heretic. A year later, exactly in the year 970, the Bulgarian priest Cosmas wrote the treaty against the heretics. Cosmas wrote that even though the name Bogomil meant loved by God, it was a lie in itself, instigated by the same heretic, Teofilo Bogomil. My name should always be associated with those who hate and not with those who love God, Lileb explained. What happened with your teachings after your death? I asked. Bogomilian teachings predicted a simple ascetic life, rejecting sex, marriage, earthly possessions, and the eating of meat. All that would continue to extend throughout Europe, which is said to have been in darkness. But that darkness was the darkness of the light, not the darkness of the true darkness. In the year 1172, number 11, and number 7 plus 2 equals 9, near the city of Toulouse in southern France, there was a small town named St. Felix de Carman, where Nicetas was preaching my doctrine, Lileb said. Who was Nicetas? I questioned. Nicetas was a clandestine Bogomilian leader. He had met with men and women of all social levels there to explain Teofilos Bogomil's message to them. Nicetas had traveled from Constantinople, where the Bogomilians were clandestine, but numerous in quality. Nicetas wanted to explain to all those who were present there the truth of the Christian religion, to help them see and understand the lies coming from Rome, as well as from their bishops. He spoke of dualism, good, evil. He also spoke to them about Satan being the creator of the universe, and of the body of humankind. And the only thing that came from God was the soul, Lileb answered. Then he advanced on your teachings and was explaining to people more and more about the true nature of human beings? I asked. Nicetas talked to them about the excesses of power, and he spoke to them about revitalizing their liberation. All those ideas corresponded well with the ideas represented by the Cathars, who were a continuation of the Bogomilian philosophy, Lileb explained. Who were the Cathars? I asked. In the 7th century, the Cathars were influenced by my teachings, and Nicetas was able to establish himself in what was known as the region of the Languedoc, and also in the part of the territories of the Crown of Aragon. The location of this area is in parts of the southwest part of France and northeastern part of Spain, Lileb said. What did the Cathars believe? I questioned. The Cathars believed that the reign of God, just as stated in the New Testament, wasn't from this world. Just like my followers explained their teachings, they believed in a dual theology, in which the universe was composed and controlled at the same time by two different forces which are in permanent conflict. One of those forces, the spiritual world, had been created by God, and the other one had been designed and developed by Satan. For the Cathars, the body represented a transitory reality. One could say that they considered it to be nothing more than the clothing or shield of the angelic seed. The Cathars affirmed that sin had evolved from the flesh, but for traditional Christians, their faith in Christ redeemed the sin. However, for Cathars to be redeemed, you needed an explicit knowledge of the previous state of the spirit, because during human life it is considered to be in purgatory. Therefore, during this existence, one needed to acquire knowledge. The faith to be saved was not enough. The Cathars tried to bring spiritual life to this world, so that in that way they could be capable as already enlightened individuals to reach the superior existence, Lileb explained. Then it was at this point when the subject of reincarnation begins? I asked. Up to this time, the conception of reincarnation was new in any philosophy related to the Christian religion. According to the beliefs of the Cathars, it is through various embodiments that the soul can reach absolute perfection and self-knowledge, and through those reincarnations, the soul would be capable of understanding and receiving divinity from which they could in turn escape and elevate themselves from this material world. Eventually, those souls would be able to reach the world of the immortals, or the spiritual world. Finally, to be able to complete the circle of reincarnation, these souls would live an aesthetic life of self-knowledge, and in that way they could avoid being corrupted by the material world surrounding them. Those human beings who would accomplish that would be known as the perfect ones, and would be the heirs of the apostles. The Cathars believed that swearing was a sin because the people who swear are too tied to the material world. Those manifestations and beliefs were very dangerous in those times, as the majority of the population was illiterate. To be placed under oath was the normal and most common manner for economic transactions, to establish and settle relationships among the field workers, subjects, and feudal men, as well as the civil and military authority of that epoch. There were many various councils at that time who condemned the Cathars and their ideologies, but it was finally Pope Innocentius III who decided to end all those ideas once and for all, Lileb explained. What did Pope Innocentius III do? I asked with great interest. The Albigensian Crusade, or the Crusade against the Cathars, was a bloody conflict which lasted 35 years. From 1209, 1 plus 2 plus 9 equals 12 equals 3, to the year 1244, 1 plus 2 plus 4 plus 4 equals 11, both numbers of Christ. Number 3 versus number 11, the number of confrontation. The doctrine of the Cathars clashed with the doctrine of the Roman Church. At the beginning of the war, there was a crusader phrase that became famous: "Kill them all. God will recognize his own," Lileb continued. Kill them all? Will God recognize his own? Any truth to that statement? I asked. It is very close to the truth, but through that way of thinking the Cathars suffered insurmountable torture and humiliation during their gradual extermination. The light had become triumphant, and the defenders of the light had won the battle, because brutal force destroyed our ideas for freedom. However, when knowledge was acquired, it becomes a challenge to eradicate, and human beings can conquer certain limitations, at least temporarily. Through the Cathars, human beings discovered where good and evil originate, and they understood that they both come from the same source. My teaching showed the way to the truth, to get to know the authentic nature of anything. It could be the nature of goodness or the nature of evil, Lileb explained. Why didn't you tell them the exact truth about the creation? I asked. To know and understand the whole process of the creation, The truth about the creators requires many centuries and many generations of people acquiring knowledge. The light is making people slaves of their beliefs. People don't question the ridiculous principles of the light because they're becoming part of the darkness. Remember that in the natural world, nothing rests. Everything is in constant movement, and everything vibrates either to the light or to the darkness. This cynical vibration has allowed us to control human beings. The fundamental principles of the darkness are followed worldwide, and eventually we will win this war between the light and the darkness. Lieleb concluded.